On the occasion of the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, the custodial vicar celebrated Mass on Mount Calvary. On September 13th, the Pontifical Institute Notre of Jerusalem celebrated 130 years of its foundation, bringing together religious authorities, congregations, and friends for the occasion. Scenarios, elements, and common objects of the Holy Land allow us today to better understand the parables of Jesus and what he wanted to say in his speeches. A city that dates back to 6000 BC. It's a strategic point in the valley of Esdraelon, a stage of disputes in different historical periods, and that would be associated with Armageddon, described in the book of Apocalypse. Many times, in order to convey his message or leave us instructions, Jesus spoke in parables using similarities and comparisons. To better understand the teachings of Jesus, we came to Taibe, the ancient Ephraim mentioned in the Bible, to get to know this place, which is the house of parables, where we will touch by hand the objects and elements mentioned by Jesus in his parables. We found ourselves on the patio of the Latin parish, which has become a point of reference, having retained the characteristics of a house from the era of Jesus. This crack in the door of the house reminds us of the passage of the Song of Songs. My beloved put his hand to the latch, my heart pounded for him. It was through a similar crack that the inopportune friend receives the 3 loaves he has asked from his neighbour. From this visualization, it is clear how difficult it must have been to satisfy the request of the inopportune friend, since during the night the beds were placed in the central part of the house.
The father who is inside says that it is not possible to satisfy the request, because he would wake up the whole house. In the end, however, due to the insistence of the neighbor, something passes through the hole.
Here we see the torch, which could not remain hidden, but illuminated the whole house.
Jesus says, "You are the light of the world, and it is by seeing what good you do that people can believe." And he adds, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not live in darkness, but will have life."
And are you able to imagine how difficult it was for the woman to find a lost coin in a house like this?
What does she do? The Gospel tells us. She sweeps the house and finds it. And when she finds it, she says to her friends, "Rejoice with me, because I found the coin I had lost."
Here, furthermore, we see the textiles which remind us of the word of Jesus, "You cannot make new darning in old clothes." We see the leather sacks which help us to understand what Jesus said when he stated, "You cannot pour new wine in old wineskins. If you do, the skins will burst. The wine will run out and the wineskins will be ruined." And again, the plough.
Jesus said, "He who puts his hand to the plough and turns back is not worthy of being my disciple." We must always look ahead, because Jesus walks before us.
Leaving Taibeth and to absorb even more the word of God in the imagery used by Jesus, we went back to a village called Sur-Bacher, located between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Seeing flocks of sheep with their shepherds is common in this region since ancient times, so much so that in the psalm David stated, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." Later, Christ himself said, "I am the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep." In the parables, Christ also uses this work, these animals, to give his teachings.
بفهم أحسن من بفهم هو مع الوقت ومع المدة الحين لما تمد علينا بيجي.
They recognize the shepherd's voice, especially after having lived with him for quite some time. I keep them close to me. I spend all the days of my life with them. Here it is easier to understand that before God we are like these sheep, fragile and in need of care. On the altar of the crucifixion located on Mount Calvary, the Franciscans celebrated the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. The Mass was celebrated by the custodial vicar of the Holy Land, Father Dobromir Yartsal. In the homily, the priest said that the logic of the world needs the logic of the cross, otherwise it requires us to respond to hatred within hatred, thus giving space to a chain of reactions that eventually makes us only feel anger towards ourselves. From the place where the cross of Christ was raised, Father Dobromir said that the Lord was offended, blasphemed, beaten and crucified. Despite all this, he did not react with revenge. The apparent defeat was in fact the great victory of love. Humility is not ignorance, and tranquility and simplicity are not naivety. Obedience is not weakness, continued the friar, who assured, these virtues help us to embody the mystery of the cross. The relic of the Holy Cross, discovered by Saint Helena, the mother of the Emperor Constantine around the year 327 AD, was carried in procession to the altar of St. Mary Magdalene and could be revered by the faithful.
Immediatamente Sant'Elena decide di dividere, di spezzare la croce e portare.
Saint Helena immediately decides to divide the cross into parts and bring one of the relics to Rome, one of the greatest pieces. The door to Rome in the area where today is the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, where the imperial palace stood. A hall of the imperial palace is transformed into the church, initially in honor of all the relics that had been brought from Jerusalem.
All'inizio era in onore di tutte le reliquie che lei aveva portato da Gerusalemme.
And even today it is possible to venerate the relics of the Holy Cross in the Basilica of Rome. There, a chapel preserves the sacred fragments. They also include the inscription that was fixed on the cross of Christ with the phrase, Jesus of Nazareth, King of Jews. Constantine intended to underline the importance of the link between the two great capitals of Christianity.
Costantino aveva ufficializzato il cristianesimo con l'editto di Costantino.
Constantine had formalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan, but then through the construction of the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre here in Jerusalem and that of Rome, he wanted to link the two great Christian capitals.
Chiamata Gerusalemme per collegare le due grandi capitali cristiane.
It is important to know that the work began by Saint Helena, the subdivision of the Cross of the Lord, has continued throughout the centuries.
Il resto della croce del Signore è stato...
What remains of the Lord's cross has been transformed into fragments in order for every local church to have a fragment, because the life of the church is founded on the cross of the Lord.
La vita della Chiesa.
The history of the Pontifical Institute of Notre Dame of Jerusalem began in 1882, a period in which many groups of pilgrims came to the Holy Land. It was destined to welcome pilgrims arriving by ship by 300, 500, 600 and even 900 people at a time. It was not possible to accommodate such a large number of people in the preceding structure. They were called national pilgrimages of penitence, and they were organized by the Church. Inspired by this, the French Assumptionist congregation built a center to welcome those who wished to know the land of the fifth gospel. In 1888, Notre Dame received its first guests. The building, located a few steps from the old city of Jerusalem, has witnessed many historical facts during these years.
Ci sono state molte guerre in questo tempo, in questi ultimi 100 anni. La prima guerra mondiale, l'ospizio è stato chiuso, la seconda guerra mondiale, poi la guerra civile, la guerra arabo-israeliana.
There have been many wars in this era over the last 100 years. During the First World War, the hospice was closed. Then there was the Second World War, the Civil War, the Arab-Israeli War that ended with the unification of Jerusalem and the Israeli conquest. But there were other problems. Because this place was in a so-called no man's land, that is, in a difficult place to maintain, and therefore the building suffered bombings, gunshots, eventually with lots of damage.
L'edificio era stato anche soggetto a bombardamenti, a colpi di fucile, era molto danneggiato.
Adversities, but also victories. In 1972, the operation was delivered to the Holy See and was rehabilitated under the papacy of Pope Paul VI. In 2004, during the papacy of John Paul II, it passed on to the administration of the Congregation of the Legionnaires of Christ.
Notre Dame nel cuore della città di Gerusalemme è un luogo importante perché
The Notre Dame is in the heart of the city of Jerusalem, an important place because above all it is the center of this complex and wonderful city. And then, being of the Holy See, it is a neutral, open place, a place where everyone can come, meet, participate in events, activities of different kinds.
attività di diverso genere.
Father Solana recalls that in recent years millions of people have passed through Notre Dame, including Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. To celebrate the 13 decades, the current Apostolic Nuncio, Bishop Leopoldo Girelli, celebrated a Mass in the Chapel of Our Lady of Peace. Among those present were custodians of the Holy Land, Brother Francesco Patton, religious communities and friends of Notre Dame. On the same occasion, a book on the Holy Land was also presented, illustrated with photographs taken by the Italian Enrico Formica.
Ho avuto la possibilità di approfondire in 5 anni perché è un territorio un po'
I have had the opportunity to have insights for 5 years because it is a somewhat difficult territory. While it is open on one side, it is closed on the other. And to carry out this work, I hope to have pulled out the soul of the stones because I support the fact that stones are silent, but in reality they tell us so many things if you can read and listen to them.
Sono silenziose, ma in effetti loro ti raccontano tante cose se le sai leggere ed ascoltare.
The texts of the book were written by the Franciscan archaeologist Father Eugenio Alliata, who has lived here for 40 years and has therefore much to tell.
La Terra Santa naturalmente bisogna conoscerla anche personalmente. Primo partire dalla Bibbia.
The Holy Land must be known personally. First of all, start from the Bible. Then see what others have seen in the Holy Land, things they have experienced to enter the heart of the Holy Land. Then personal experience is important because it enables us to better understand both the Bible and previous travelers, pilgrims, writers who have told of their experience in the Holy Land.
I precedenti viaggiatori, pellegrini e scrittori che hanno scritto le loro esperienze nella Terra Santa.
A city that has its roots in the Neolithic about 6,000 years BC. Its acme was during the Bronze Age and then it gradually continued until the Iron Age, that is, the age of ancient Israel. Megiddo is located in the north part of the country in the region of the Esdraelon Valley of Jezreel. Its ruins today constitute an archaeological site considered Israeli National Park. The city is well known for its historical and geographical importance, also due to the many archaeological and documentary evidence, such as the letters of Tel Amarna of the 14th century BC. The king of Megiddo, or governor of the city-state, writes a letter to the pharaoh to describe the problems they were experiencing, scenes of daily life of a city that had its importance.
Di una città che però chiaramente aveva quindi una sua importanza.
A crossroads of several valleys, a transit point to the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt and the Mesopotamian Empire, Megiddo is located at the base of the Mount Carmel. It is mentioned in the books of Joshua and of the Judges in the Old Testament as a significant center in the Canaanite era. Theatre of several battles thanks to its strategic position, it is also referred to as the City of the Kingdom of Israel.
Dell'epoca poi più propriamente biblica dei re di Israele,
we have evidence that Solomon left Megiddo as a deposit city from the more properly biblical era of the kings of Israel. When the excavations began, they found some large Palatine structures which consisted of 2 large royal palaces with stables adjacent. They thought they had found part of Solomon's stables. Of these constructions he built for his own cavalry.
Parte delle stalle di Salomone, di questi complessi che Salomone costruì per la propria cavalleria.
One of the main points of the park is its 36-meter deep tank. Passing through the 70-meter tunnel, you can recognize the water system built during King Achab's reign between 874 and 854 BC. In the year 609 BC, King Josiah camped in Megiddo and was defeated during the battle with Pharaoh Necho. This defeat opened the way a few years later to the fall of the kingdom of Judea and Jerusalem. Megiddo was abandoned 2 centuries later, but recovered thanks to a Christian tradition. The city is not explicitly mentioned in the New Testament, but has been associated with the place of the final battle between the forces of good and evil, which is described in chapter 16 of the book of Revelation, the Armageddon, in Hebrew, Mount, Har, of Megiddo. Armageddon refers to a place near Megiddo where, after the great battle in which Josiah died, there was a decisive battle between the forces of good and those of evil. But this time the outcome of the battle in which the Holy King Josiah died was completely overthrown. The new David, Jesus of Nazareth, won the definitive battle of the Armageddon at the end of time.
Dell'Armageddon